Hi, I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. Queen excluders or honey excluders. The queen excluder is basically a grid which has holes that are big enough for worker bees to pass through, but not the queen. So we use them for a variety of purposes. But there's different schools of thought as to the value of queen excluders. Are they a useful management tool, or do they stop honey and slow down honey production? Queen excluders are really useful. In my view, I use queen excluders on a great deal of my hives, but before I really knew how to use a queen excluder, I could see the reason why people thought they were honey excluders and why people didn't use them. Because they really need to be used with the knowledge of what is the consequence of putting barriers in the hive and how's the best way to manage the hive that way. So why do we use them? Number one, we use them to stop the queen moving from the brood chamber down below to the honey supers up above. And the aim there is to stop the queen laying eggs in the honey supers and therefore having brood in the honey supers at a time where you want to take your honey off. If you have brood and you're upstairs in your honey supers, then you can't get the bees out with something like a bee escape. The bees will stay on that brood. So there is a real advantage of using a queen excluder at some times of the year, preferably about 4 weeks before you're planning to take those honey supers off. The other reason you might use a queen excluder is to keep more than one queen away from each other. And so I'll be showing you videos of that later in the spring, but where you have more than one colony and the worker bees are communal between two colonies, but you don't want the queens to come into contact with each other because they'll kill each other. So you can use a queen excluder to have one colony on one side, one colony on the other side of the queen and your communal honey supers up above. We'll talk about that in other videos. The problems with queen excluders are that initially yes, they are a barrier to moving up and down through the colony. And unless used right, they will slow down honey production. But worse still is if you don't use the queen excluder right, you will start to crowd out the brood chamber and you will end up with swarming. When I'm contacted about my bees have swarmed from beginners, I would say that 3 out of 4 are at the time at which they've moved from their 2 brood chambers to adding their first honey super. And hey presto, 2 weeks after they've added their first honey super, the colony swarmed. And I'm going to show you why. So let's imagine a scenario where you're a beginner beekeeper, you're about a month and a half into your bee rearing, and you've got your 2 brood chambers, and you're ready to put your first honey super on. In other words, maybe 7 or 8 of these combs are being built and are occupied by bees, and you need room for your first honey super. So let's picture the scenario. Come a bit closer, we'll have a look. Okay, we'll take the covers off. And we're now looking into our hive, which is going to be full of bees. The cluster is occupying a good 7 or 8 out of 10 frames. It's ready to go. And the mistake people make then is they put their queen excluder on and they put their first honey super on. And they hope that the bees are going to move right through that queen excluder into the new honey super. But the problem is, this brand new honey super is full of just foundation. And what bees seem to be very reluctant to do is initially move through a queen excluder into a super of just foundation. In other words, there's no drawn comb up there. If you put an empty super above a queen excluder as the colony is growing and you've got a honey flow on there, very often you're going to have a situation where the bees swarm because they're just so slow at coming through the queen excluder. And this will be particularly true of the plastic queen excluders I'm going to show you shortly. The metal ones are a little bit better than that. Maybe it's more like 50-50%. Okay, But what happens is the bees are slow to go up through the queen excluder, therefore they get crowded down below the queen excluder. That leads to swarming. So initially, do without it. Take the queen excluder off and put your honey super straight on your brood chamber. The bees will go up there and they will start building without any inhibition at all. The problem is there that, okay, it's a problem for some, I don't consider it a problem, but the queen will also start to rear brood up in this area. But who cares? It doesn't matter. You're going to make sure that by the time you come to take these honey supers off, the queen is out of there. So I would wait until at least you've got half a dozen combs being drawn upstairs before you consider putting the queen excluder on. So let's wait. Let's say we've put our honey super on. The bees are building up here. We've got a super full of bees. It's about half full of comb and honey. But say 4 or 5 of those combs are being built. Okay, now what you do, take this off. Take the frames full of comb and brood and shake the bees off into the lower part of the hive until you make sure that you've got the bees off all the combs and you've shaken all the bees from the upper super down into the brood chamber. Now you know the queen is downstairs. Whether she's been up in the honey super or not before is irrelevant now. We know she's down below. Now you can put your queen excluder on, and now you can put your honey super. And now you can put your honey super back on. And because you've got drawn comb up here and you've got some brood or honey, the bees will go straight up and down through this queen excluder as if it wasn't there. And you can add your next honey super on top, and again, no issues. So what I would recommend is that wait until, if you're here in this part of Maine, I'd wait until sometime in July before putting the queen excluder on. But the rule of thumb is get some drawn comb above there. Then shake the bees down and put the queen excluder on. Then you should be okay. In subsequent years, this is much less of an issue because you're not adding honey supers that are just foundation. If you've got some drawn comb, mix it with the foundation so that the first super that you put on has got a mixture of drawn comb and foundation, and you shouldn't have a problem then. But if you see a reluctance for the bees to go through the queen excluder, just take it off. Typically what I do is I will leave my queen excluder off until the fall honey flow, or beginning of the fall honey flow. Unless I'm managing my colonies to have 2 queens or to have a single brood chamber management. That's a different story, and there'll be many different videos. Okay, I also want to talk to you about the different types of queen excluder that there are. And what I have with me here is 4 different kinds of queen excluder. The first one is a bit of a throwback, a blast from the past really. Back in the 70s when I was keeping bees as a kid, we used a zinc queen excluder. So this is a bit of a collector's item. It's a sheet of zinc with the holes pierced through, and so you can see it's just got a metal grid with the holes pierced through. These were phased out for a variety of reasons. Number one is it's probably a terrible idea having a sheet of heavy metal like zinc in amongst your bees and amongst the brood chamber there. I don't know if there were any studies that showed that the zinc was an issue, but as a biologist I could say heavy metals and larval development don't mix. The second reason was that some manufacturers, in the punching out of these holes in the zinc, it left a very sharp edge, and it was actually trimming the wings off bees as they passed through because the metal had such sharp edges. So you'll not come across one of these. You probably have to pay quite a premium to get hold of one of these now. It's called a zinc queen excluder. The next one is a plastic queen excluder. Plastic queen excluder is a brand new one here, nice and flexible. Hole size is always steady, and this is a good size. Some queen excluders used to be made with the holes going this way as opposed to this way. If you have a queen excluder with the holes going this way, that is a problem. So some of the issues with a plastics queen excluder, especially in the heat, maybe not a brand new queen excluder, but in the heat, the plastic queen excluder can sag down, especially if another super is put on top of it and there was something in the way and it pushes the queen excluder down. That leaves a very small area for the bees to pass through relative to what it could be, and that can be a bit of an inhibition to move through the queen excluder. So what I always do is I'll take a couple of twigs off a tree nearby, I'll just lay them across the frame and put the queen excluder back on. This way that queen excluder will never have that reduced surface area for holes for bees to get through. This is also the reason why the holes going lengthwise as opposed to crosswise has probably been phased out by the manufacturers, because the ones that used to go this way also gave rise to being very small gaps in between the frames, so it gave less area for bees to move through. So use twigs underneath your plastic queen excluders to make them work just that little bit better. Now, here's probably another reason why the zinc queen excluders were phased out. They do have the holes going longitudinally, and so there's a much reduced area for the bees to get through if this went down across the frames. So the bees can only get through these holes here, say one or two, this row of holes, as opposed to if you'd supported it with the twigs. Now the whole surface area is available for the bees, so the bees can get through to access every single one of these holes. Queen excluder, the plastic queen excluder is very good, and inexpensive, but the problem with plastic queen excluders is that with time they become quite brittle and they start cracking and you start losing bits off the edges, and I've got a couple of them here. They're just sort of starting to fall apart. But having said that, these queen excluders are 15 years old, so they're still around. But for example, if you look at this hole here where you've got a big crack, you've got quite a big hole here. That's easily big enough for a queen to pass through, and this is no longer a queen excluder. So this needs to go in the bin. In fact, I'll just, that's no good anymore. So, plastic queen excluders, they're okay. The metal queen excluders, which I showed you before, is a slightly dirtier one. Metal queen excluders, these are great. These will last for a long time. They usually stay nice and flat, which is also important. The thing you have to watch out for with the metal queen excluder, if you just take it off a hive and throw it down on the ground and it lands on a stick or a rock or the corner of a top or something, you can bend the wires. And if you bend the wires, the hole's too big, the queen can get through, you may as well not be using a queen excluder. So metal queen excluders are very good, probably worth the extra money over the plastic queen excluders, as they're going to last you a long time. And then the fancier queen excluders, you can have metal queen excluders that have wooden rims. So these have been around for quite a while, but in fact the problem with the wooden rims is that the wood breaks and it can crack, and they're not going to withstand as much abuse as the plain old metal queen excluder. So the wooden queen excluder, the metal queen excluder with a wooden rim, I like it in terms of the bees pass through it very readily because there's no issues about it blocking up. But what they will do is they will build a lot of this burr comb on it, which will block it up and will make it hard to pry off the brood chamber or from the bottom of the honey super, and you're more likely to damage it and break bits and that sort of thing. So I wouldn't say that the wooden rimmed queen excluders are my favorite. I like to use them initially, but they become because the bees so readily take to them, but they do require a lot more care And as I've got to move through things pretty quickly in my bee yard, I don't have time to be really careful with my equipment. I need robust equipment. So my top queen excluder amongst all of these is the good old plain metal queen excluder. Is my favorite of the 4. I hope you found that video helpful. If you do, please press that subscribe button. It helps me get more subscribers, means my videos get ranked more frequently or higher up in the YouTube algorithm, and it will help other people find this channel. So if you found it helpful, press subscribe, and it's going to let other people find it as well. I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. See you next time.